Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. How are you? I hope you'd be fine. This is Cambridge Lower Secondary Book 8. And today we are going to start exercise 1.3 of this book, in which we are going to learn the perfect squares, perfect cubes, and the square roots and cube roots. So starting from question number 1, we are provided with 4 numbers out there, and we have to find out the squares and cubes of these numbers. So before doing this question, let us learn that the squares of a positive number is always positive. What is basically a square? Square means multiplying a number by itself. So a square of a positive number is positive, and a square of a negative number is also positive. So perfect square is always positive. A perfect square, we can conclude it from here. A perfect square is always positive. Okay? Why is that so? Let us discuss it. So if we have a number like -7 or +7, when we will square these numbers, what will happen? It means we have two negative numbers together. And we have already learned in previous classes that when we multiply two negative numbers, minus sign cuts the minus sign and we have a positive answer. So therefore, the square of a negative number would always be positive, because while finding the square of a positive number, we are basically multiplying a negative number by itself. That is a negative number by a negative number. Similarly, if we multiply a number by itself, which is positive, so it would be positive. So what have we learned from here? That the perfect square would always be positive. So what about a negative perfect square? So this type of a number is not a real number. It's an imaginary number. So we use iota. It is called iota. And we're going to learn it later on. But what have we learned so far? That the square of a positive number is positive. A negative number is also positive. But when we talk about the cubes, so the cube of a negative number is negative. Of a positive number is positive. Why? Because while finding the cube, we have three same numbers. Okay, so for positive number, it would be positive. Like if I'm finding the cube of 7, it would be 7 multiplied by 7 multiplied by 7. That is 343. Since all three numbers are positive, so the answer would be positive. That's obvious. But what about cube? If you are finding a cube of a negative number, it would be -7 multiplied by -7 multiplied by -7. So when we'll multiply these two numbers, two negative numbers, it will cut the signs of negative with each other. So it becomes 49. But when we'll multiply it with the third negative number, since now we have the first number as positive and the second number is negative, so the answer would be negative. So what have we learned so far? That the perfect squares are always positive, but the perfect cubes, the cube of a positive number would be positive, the cube of a negative number would be negative, right? Now let's move to the exercise. We have to work out the square of 7. So the square of 7 means 7 multiplied by 7, it's 49. -7 square means, okay, there's also a difference. We'll discuss it. When minus sign is inside the bracket and there is a power, it means we have -7 multiplied by -7. So minus minus cuts each other, and the answer to -7 whole square would also be positive. But let me tell you people one thing over here. There is a difference between -7 to the whole square and -7 square. This means we are squaring a negative number. Okay, so the answer to this one would be positive 49. But when we talk about minus 7 to the whole square, it's not minus 7 to the whole square anymore. It's actually minus 1 multiplied by 7 square. This minus sign tells us that this minus is getting multiplied to 7, getting squared. So in this case, we will apply the BODMAS rule, which says O for orders and S for subtraction. Subtraction comes later on than the order. Order means powers and roots. So if we have a negative sign and a root together, we will apply the power first and then we will go for the negative sign. So it's basically minus 7 square. See? So if sign is not enclosed into the bracket, then your answer would be negative. So in this case, it would be minus 49. Okay, it's not the square of negative 7. You see, there's a difference. The square of positive 7 was positive 49. The square of negative 7 is also positive 49. But when we talk about the square of 7 having minus sign, it would be minus 49. These are the three cases that we have to look for. So the square of a positive and a negative number would always be positive. So here it would be positive 49. Again, it's positive 49, but when we talk about the cube, so 7 cube is 7 multiplied by 7 multiplied by 7, which is 343. And then minus 7 multiplied by minus 7 multiplied by minus 7 is equals to minus 343. So you can see that in the first 4 parts, we are getting positive answers. In the last one, we are getting a negative answer. Okay. Now let's talk about the cube roots. When you find this sign, it means we have to find out the cube root. The cube root is the inverse of cubes, right? Let's start from 1. The cube of 1 is 1. The cube of 2 is 8. 2 twos are 4 twos are 8. The cube of 3 is 27. The cube of 4 is 64. 4 fours are 16. 16 fours are 64. The cube of 5 is 125. Okay, 5 fives are 25. 25 fives are 125. So we have these are the numbers that are perfect cubes. Then when we talk about the cube of 6, it's 216. 6 6 are 36, 36 6 are 216. So these are called the perfect cubes. But the reverse of it would be like 1, 8, 27, 64, 125, 26. These are the perfect cubes. And the number between these two numbers, between every two perfect cubes, are non-perfect cubes. Like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 till 7 are all non-perfect cubes. Only 1 and 8 are perfect cube, and there ain't any other perfect cube between 1 and 8. So if we need to find out the cube root of 1, it would be 1. The cube root of 8, it would be 2. Let me write it over here. The cube root of 1 is 1. The cube root of 8 is 2. The cube root of 27 is 3. And how do we find it out? That if a number is a perfect cube or not? So if simply we talk about 2, let's take 8. 8 is a perfect cube. I will find its prime factors. I'll try dividing it with 2. 2 fours are 8. 2 twos are 4. 2 ones are 2, right? For every perfect cube, there must be a group of 3 same prime numbers, 3 same factors. So you can see that 8 is equals to 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 2, right? So I can write it as 8 is equals to 2 cube. When I will take the cube root on both sides, what will happen? This cube root will cut the cube and I'm left with 2. So this is how we find the cube root of a perfect cube. Cube root of 8 would be 2. Cube root of 27 would be 3. Cube root of 64 would be 4. How is it so? Because cube root of 8 is equals to cube root of 2 cube. Cutting the cube root with cube and we are left with 2, right? Similarly, when we talk about the cube root of 125, so 125 is equals to 5 cube, right? So we can keep 5 cube inside the cube root, putting both of them. 125 is equals to 5 cube. So if we find cube root on both sides, what will happen? This cube root will cut cube and we are left with 5, which means the cube root of 125 is 5. Now let's move to the question. The question says find the cube root of 125. We just discussed it, that the cube root of 125 is 5. And we can show the workings as well over here, that the cube root of 125 means we can write it as, instead of 125, we can write 5 cube over here because 5 cube equals to 125, right? Now we will cut the cube root with cube and we are left with 5. So it's 5. Similarly, when we talk about minus 27, so we can write it over here as cube root of minus 27 is equals to cube root of minus 27 is equals to minus 3 multiplied by minus 3 multiplied by minus 3. I told you earlier that the cube of a negative number would be negative. So the cube root of a negative perfect cube would also be negative. It would be minus 3 multiplied by minus 3 multiplied by minus 3 because both are equivalent, right? So I can write it like this. Minus 27 is equals to minus 3 to the whole cube. And now when I'm going to cut the cube root with cube, what am I left with? It's minus 3. Which means the cube root of minus 27 is minus 3. Okay? So we can say that the cube of a negative number is negative. The cube root of a negative number is also negative. So what about minus 1? Okay, always remember, then the perfect square of 1 is 1. The perfect square of minus 1 is 1. The square root of 1 is plus 1 or minus 1. But when we talk about minus 1, so the cube of minus 1 is minus 1 and the cube root of minus 1 is also minus 1. And for minus 8, it would be minus 2. That's all. Okay. Now let's solve these equations. They are very interesting. Here the question part A is x square is equals to 100. We know that 100 is a perfect square. 100 is equals to 10 multiplied by 10. So we can say that 100 is the perfect square of 10, right? So whenever we have these type of equations where we have a square on the variable, so we just have to take a square root on both sides. By doing so, what are we going to get? It would be under root x square is equals to under root 100. This under root basically have a power 2 hidden over here. So under root would always cut this power 2 because under root means power half and half multiplied by 2 is equals to 1. So the number becomes 1 whole. So we will cut this square root with a square and we are left with x is equals to 10 square. And now again, this square root will cut this square. So we are left with 10. It means if x square is equals to 100, then x is equals to 10. That's all. Now let's do the next question. Next part, I mean. Part B is x square is equals to 144. We know that 144 is a perfect square of 12. So we can write it as x square is equals to 12 square. Now what we will do? we will take the square root on both sides. When we will take the square root on both sides, the square will be cut down by the square roots. Okay. So in this case, what are we going to do? We know that x square is equals to 12 square. So we will write it in terms of 12. And then we will find out the square root on both sides. We know that square root can cut the power 2. So it will cut power 2 on both sides and we are left with x is equals to 12. That's it. So what have we learned so far? If we have a cube root, it will be cut by the cube. Okay. If we have a square root, it will be cut by a square. That's all. Okay. Since all of these numbers are squares over here, so we will cut them by the squares. In part C, we have x square is equals to 1. We know that 1 is the perfect square of 1 itself. So we will find the square root on both sides. Square root will cut the squares and we are left with x is equals to 1. The next part we have x square is equals to 0. X square is equals to 0 means of 0 square. So x would be 0. That's all. Because 0 multiplied by 0 is 0. Next we have x square plus 9 is equals to 0. This one is different. X square plus 9 is equals to 0. Now we will solve it using the linear equations rules. So if x square plus 9 is equals to 0, it means x square is equals to 0 minus 9. Why? Because what are we doing? We are subtracting both sides by negative 9. X square plus 9 minus 9 is equals to 0 minus 9. So we subtracted both sides by minus 9 to have a nil effect. And by doing so, what happened? Plus 9 cuts minus 9 and we are left with x square is equals to minus 9. Now we know that if we take the square root on both sides, what will happen? If we take the square root on both sides, we know that minus 9 is not the square of minus 3. No. So we cannot write minus 3 to the whole square over here. What should we do now? We will write it over here as it will be x is equals to under root minus 9 as it is. And we will write this is not a real number. Okay. You can solve it like this. You can split it into two parts. So you can write it as x is equals to under root minus 1 multiply by 9 because minus 1 multiplied by 9 is equals to minus 9. So we will split it like this. Then we know that under root minus 1 is equals to iota, right? So we can say that it is equivalent to minus 1 multiplied by under root 9. We know that under root 9 is equals to 3. So we can write it as in place of minus 1, under root minus 1, we will write iota. In place of multiply by 9, we will write multiply by 3. So it becomes x is equals to 3 iota. But since this is not included in your syllabus, so you don't need to do these workings over here for including iota. You will simply write down your answer x is equals to under root minus 9 and that it is not a real number. It cannot be solved any further, right? This is how you're gonna solve this question. Now let's move to question number 4. In question number 4, we have again some equations. So we will solve these equations as well, but these includes the cubes. So this time we will take cube roots on both sides. If x cube is equals to 216, we can say that we will find the cube root on both sides. Okay, when we will have power 3 on a variable, so we will take cube root on both sides. Since we know that 216 is equals to 6 cube, it's the cube of 6. 216 is equals to 6 multiplied by 6 multiplied by 6. So in place of 216, I can write 6 power 3. Okay. So how am I going to write it? I will write it x cube is equals to 6 cube. Then I will take cube root on both sides. Then what will happen? This cube root will cut the cubes on both sides, and I'm left with x is equals to 6. Okay, so if x cube is equals to 216, x would be 6. In the next part, we have x cube plus 27 is equals to 0. Now, there's one more step involved. We will now move plus 27 to the other side, and it will become x cube is equals to minus 27. The sign will be changed. So I can write it as x cube is equals to minus 3 to the whole cube, because I know that the cube of a negative number is negative. So the cube root of a negative number is also negative. Minus 27 is equals to minus 3 multiplied by minus 3 multiplied by minus 3. You see, we discussed it earlier. And since there are minus 3 minus 3's, so I can write it as minus 3 to the whole cube, right? So I am substituting minus 27 as minus 3 to the whole cube. Now I will take cube root on both sides. And now these cube roots will cut the cubes. And what am I left with? X is equals to minus 3. So if x cube is equals to minus 27, x would be minus 3. It means if we have any number in cube, if it's positive, its cube root would be positive. If it's negative, its cube root would be negative. Next, we have x cube plus 1 is equals to 0. So it's actually x cube is equals to minus 1. And we discussed it earlier that minus 1 would be minus 1 if we are finding x cube. So we can say that x cube is equals to minus 1 to the whole cube, right? Because minus 1 is equals to minus 1 multiplied by minus 1 multiplied by minus 1. Since we have to remove the cube, so we will write it as minus 1 to the whole cube. Okay, let me write it over here so that you won't get confused. Minus 1 is equals to minus 1 multiplied by minus 1 multiplied by minus 1. These two will be cut and minus 1 will be left, so it is minus 1. Now what are we going to do? We will find the cube root on both sides. Now the cube will cut the cube roots, and we are left with x is equals to minus 1. So the cube of minus 1 is minus 1, and the cube root of minus 1 is also minus 1, right? In the next part, we have x cube plus 125 equals to 0. So it would be x cube is equals to minus 125. And we know that minus 125 is the cube of minus 5 cube. So I can replace minus 125 with minus 5 to the whole cube. Don't forget to enclose it inside the bracket, because I told you earlier that if you will write it as minus 5 power 3, it won't be equivalent to minus 125. Okay, make sure that you put the correct signs. Then we have cubes on both sides. So we will write cube roots on both sides, and cube root will cut cubes. So it will give us x is equals to minus 5. That's all. Now, what do we have to do in question number 5? In question number 5, it says 27 square is equals to 9 cube is equals to 729. It means let us split it into two parts. The square of 27 is 729. Why? Because when you multiply 27 by 27, it's 729. Agreed. And similarly, the other fact is the cube of 9 is also 729. So why? Because 9 multiplied by 9 multiplied by 9 is also 729. Right? So these are the two facts that we have to use to solve the next four parts of question number 5. Now they're saying, find the square root of 729. The square root of 729 means it is equivalent to of what number? 729 is a perfect square of 27. So I can write it as 27 square over here. Why? Because I have to remove the square root. So I will cut the square root with a square, and the answer to this would be 27. It means the square root of 729 would be 27. But what about square root of minus 729? it won't be minus 27 because we have learned that the square root of a negative number is not a real number. So for 27 minus 729, we cannot replace it with minus 27 to the whole square. No. So what should I write? I will simply write minus 729. Look, the question says, so I'll simply write cannot be solved. Okay. Now let's talk about the cubes. Cube root of 729. We know that 9 is the cube root of 729 because 729 is the cube of 9. So to find out the cube root of 729, what we will do? We will write 9 cube inside. Because 9 nines are 81, 81 nines are 729. This cube root will cut 9 cube and then we are left with 9. So the cube root of 729 is 9. And that minus 729. So we know that yes, the cube root of a negative number is also negative. So we will replace it by minus 9 to the whole cube. And so this cube root will cut cube and we are left with minus 9. So out of these 4 numbers, we got the answers to 3 parts, but for part 2, we were unable to find the answer, right? Now let's move to question number 6, which says a calculator shows the square root of 8 minus under root of minus 8 to the whole square is 0. Explain why this is correct. Okay. What does it mean? Let us understand. If we will solve it directly, so what will happen? That square root will cut square, square root will cut square, and what are we left with? We are left with 8, this minus sign, then this minus sign, and then 8. It won't be equivalent to a 0. So we are not going to solve it like this because it's 8 plus 8, which is equivalent to 16, not 0. So this is not the correct working. Let me show you how you have to solve it. If we have 8 square minus 8 square is equals to 0. So the square of 8 is 64 and thereof minus 8 is also 64. So here comes a positive under root 64 and a negative under root 64. They are inverse of each other, so it gives us a 0. You see, it's just like 2 minus 2 is equals to 0. Huh? 100 minus 100 is equals to 0. So similarly, under root 2 minus under root 2 is equals to 0. And similarly, 64 minus 64 under root is equals to 0. You see? When two numbers are together, a positive and a negative, so the answer to this would always be negative, 0. Now we have to find out the cube root of 4 minus the cube root of 4, and we have to show the workings. So let's do it like this. The cube root of 4 minus the cube root of minus 4 cube. So if let's expand it, it would become cube root of 64 because 4 fours are 16, 16 fours are 64. And then here comes minus sign. Then here we have cube root and this one would be minus 64. Now we know that the cube root of 64 is 4 and thereof minus 64 is minus 4. So in this case, it would be 4 plus 4 equals 8, not 0. Okay, so you can solve it directly as well. If there is a cube root, you can solve it directly. Why? Because the cube of a negative number is negative. In the previous case, the square of a negative number is not negative. Therefore, we cannot solve it like this. We have to change -8 to the whole square with positive 64. Okay? The square of a negative number, the square of a negative number is always positive. So we can solve it like this also. 4 cube, here cube, cutting the cube roots, and again, here we have a cube, -4 enclosed, and here we have a cube. So cutting these cubes, what are we left with? 4 minus 4. It will give us the same answer, that is 4 plus 4 equals to 8. So we are done with the first 6 questions, inshallah. In the next video, we are going to solve the next few questions. Until then, take care. Do subscribe to my channel if you are new. Don't forget to share it with your friends. Take care. Allah Hafiz.